The celebration lights filled the void of space with colors that had never seen before. From his small ship's cockpit, he watched three massive flagships float in perfect formation. Each ship represented one of the great powers of the Galactic Coalition. The vessel gleamed with silver technology. The L ship pulsed with soft blue energy. The warship stood dark and threatening even in peace. Adjusted his scanner and leaned back in his worn pilot seat. His ship was nothing compared to those giants. It was old, patched in a dozen places, and running on systems that most coalition species would call primitive. But it was his, and it had kept him alive for 5 years on the frontier. The war was over. 50 years of fighting had finally ended. The insect-like creatures that had swept through coalition space like a plague had retreated to their home nebula. The coalition had won, or so they claimed. Wasn't so sure. He had been a soldier once, back on Earth. The planet where humans lived was far from this celebration, far from the major trade routes and power centers. Earth had only developed faster than light travel 20 years ago. The coalition had barely noticed. To them, humans were newcomers, primitives who had stolen or stumbled onto technology they didn't truly understand. That attitude had suited fine. He had left Earth's military after too many missions that left scars on his mind. Out here on the frontier, no one asked questions. No one cared that he was human. He took small jobs, delivered cargo, mapped asteroid fields, and kept to himself. His console beeped, frowned at the display. It was a distress signal, old and weak. The frequency was outdated, the kind that listening posts used before the war. He traced the source to a sector that had been abandoned 3 years ago when the push through. Protocol said to report it and move on. The coalition military would investigate if they thought it was important, but something about the signal bothered. It had a pattern, a rhythm that felt wrong. He looked at the celebration still lighting up his. Fireworks of pure energy burst across space. Music played on all frequencies, a mix of species songs that created strange harmony. Admiral, the commander, was giving a speech about lasting peace and new beginnings. Turned his ship away from the celebration and set course for the old listening post. The journey took 3 days. The sector was empty and dark. Dead satellites floated past his ship like tombstones. The listening post was a small station built into an asteroid. Half of it was torn apart, probably from an attack years ago. Docked carefully. The station still had minimal power, enough to keep the distress beacon running. He put on his environment suit and entered through an emergency airlock. Inside, the station was a mess. Equipment hung from broken cables. Dried fluids that he didn't want to identify stained the walls, but the main computer core was intact, protected by its armored chamber. It took him an hour to access the data. What he found made his blood run cold. The station's long-range sensors had continued recording even after the crew evacuated. The data showed biosignatures moving through space. Lots of them. But they weren't moving away from coalition space. They were circling around it, using the nebula clouds as cover, regrouping in patterns that looked organized and deliberate. Downloaded everything and rushed back to his ship. He opened a communication channel to Coalition Military Command. "This is Freelance Scout, registration number Earth 7742. I have urgent information about movements in Sector 89. The response took several minutes. When it came, the voice sounded bored. "Scout, the war is over. They have been pushed back to their nebula. Your data is probably old recordings." "I'm sending you the timestamps," said, keeping his voice calm. "This data is from the last 6 months. They're not retreating, they're repositioning." There was a long silence. Then a different voice came on, sharper and more official. "Scout, this is Commander. We've reviewed your data. The threat has been neutralized. What you're seeing is residual scanner echoes and background radiation. We appreciate your concern, but we must ask you not to spread false alarms during this peace period." But the patterns are being misinterpreted by you, interrupted. You're human, correct? Your species has only been in space for 2 decades. Perhaps you don't understand biosignatures as well as you think. The Coalition has been studying them for 50 years. Felt his jaw tighten. I know what I'm seeing. The matter is closed, Scout. Continue with your regular duties. Command out. The channel went dead. Sat in his cockpit, staring at the data on his screen. Every instinct he had developed in combat told him he was right. They weren't defeated. They were planning something. But no one would listen to a human. He thought about going to Earth, bringing this to his old commanders. But Earth had no influence in Coalition politics. They were barely members, more like tolerated observers. Even if Earth's military believed him, what could they do? For the next 3 weeks, continued to monitor the data. He set up his own network of scanner buoys in the sectors near the nebula. Every day, the patterns became clearer. They were gathering in massive numbers. They were building something in the dark spaces between stars. He tried 2 more times to contact Coalition Command. Each time he was dismissed, more rudely than before. The 3rd time, they threatened to revoke his freelance license if he continued to spread panic. Stopped calling. Instead, he began preparing. He stocked his ship with extra supplies, weapons, and fuel. He studied the data obsessively, trying to predict what they would do and when. He didn't have to wait long. 6 months after the peace celebration, the attacks began. Not in one place, but everywhere at once. 12 systems reported forces appearing from nowhere. Colony worlds that had just begun to rebuild were burning. Received the emergency broadcasts in his ship. He listened to the panic, the confusion, the desperate calls for help. The Coalition military was scrambling, but they had demilitarized. They had sent most of their fleets home. They had believed in their own victory. He set course for the nearest system under attack. He was just one human in a small ship, but he had been right. And maybe, just maybe, someone would listen now. As his ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, allowed himself a bitter smile. The Coalition had called humans primitive. They had dismissed Earth's warnings. They were about to learn that sometimes primitives see things that civilized species miss. The Coalition war room was chaos. Screens showed 12 systems burning simultaneously. Red emergency markers blinked across the star map like a disease spreading through a body. Admiral 1 stood at the tactical display, her face tight with controlled fury. She was one of only 3 humans serving in Coalition military command. For 10 years, she had worked to prove that humans belonged here, that Earth deserved respect. Now she watched as every defensive strategy the Coalition had perfected over 50 years crumbled like paper in fire. "The 4th Fleet is gone," reported an officer, his scales pale with shock. 17 ships destroyed in 20 minutes. "How is this possible?" demanded Fleet Commander. The massive warrior slammed his fist on the console. "They were broken. We saw their fleets scatter." "They adapted," one said quietly. She zoomed in on a battle recording from one of the fallen systems. "Look at their attack pattern. They're not using the same tactics. Every defense we prepared for, every countermeasure we developed, they've evolved past them." The room fell silent as the recording played. The ships moved with terrifying precision. They anticipated every Coalition maneuver before it happened. When Coalition ships tried the formations that had won the last war, they simply tore them apart. "Where is that scout?" one asked suddenly. "The human who tried to warn us 6 months ago." A L communications officer checked his records. "Freelancer. Last known position was Sector 89. He's been operating independently since we rejected his data." "Find him," one ordered. "I want to speak with him immediately." It took 3 hours to locate. When his face appeared on the communication screen, one could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Behind him, his ship's cockpit was filled with makeshift monitoring equipment. Admiral said, his voice neutral. No hint of "I told you so," though he had every right. "I should have listened," one said bluntly. "The coalition should have listened. We need your help now." Was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "I've been tracking them. I have data on their movements, their patterns. But Admiral, there's something else you need to know." "Tell me." "I rescued someone from Research Station Delta 9 before it fell. Dr. Rim. She has information about why this is happening." 20 minutes later, Dr. Rim was on the communication channel. She was younger than one expected, her silver scales marked with burns from her escape, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "The Let Us Win the First War," Rim explained. "My research team discovered it 3 months ago, but we couldn't get anyone to listen. They staged their defeat. They wanted to study our tactics, learn how we fight. While we celebrated peace, they were in their nebula evolving, adapting their biology and strategy to counter everything we do." Roared in anger. "Impossible. No species would sacrifice so many of their own just to learn." "They are a hive species," Rim continued. "Individual units mean nothing. The Queens care only about the survival of the whole. They played a 50-year game and we never suspected." The war room erupted in arguments. Some commanders refused to believe it. Others demanded immediate counterattacks. One watched the chaos and felt something cold settle in her chest. The coalition military was trained for honorable warfare, for logical strategies. They couldn't adapt to an enemy that used deception as a weapon. She thought about Earth, about human history, about the thousands of years humans had spent fighting each other with every dirty trick imaginable. "We need Earth," one said. The room went quiet. "We need human strategists." Humans stared at her. "They barely have a fleet. What can they offer?" "Something the coalition has forgotten," one replied. "We've been so civilized, so logical for so long, we've forgotten that war isn't always logical. Humans remember." It took 2 days of emergency council meetings. Many coalition members resisted the idea. Earth was primitive, unproven, but colony after colony fell. The push deeper into coalition space. Desperation finally won the argument. Earth received the emergency request and responded within hours. They wouldn't send their largest fleet. Instead, they sent their most dangerous minds. Captain Dongwu arrived with 30 ships. One met him at the coalition's primary military station. She had reviewed his file. Former naval officer, veteran of Earth's territorial conflicts, known for unconventional tactics that made traditionalists uncomfortable. He was shorter than most coalition species, with gray starting to show in his hair. But when he looked at the tactical displays, his eyes were sharp and calculating. 30 ships, said dismissively when he saw the human fleet. "This is what Earth sends." "Quality over quantity," Dongwu replied calmly. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had survived situations that should have killed him. Admiral One requested creative solutions. We brought creativity. He walked to the main display and studied the attack patterns. After several minutes, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. "I see the problem," Dongwu said. "You're still fighting the last war. You're trying to counter their tactics with improved versions of your own. That's not going to work." "Then what do you suggest?" demanded an admiral. "We stop fighting fair." The coalition officers exchanged confused looks. Dongwu pulled up a map of the mining colony, currently under attack. "This colony is defended by 60 ships using standard coalition formations. They are crushing them because they know exactly what those formations will do. Here's what we're going to do instead." For the next hour, Dongwu outlined a battle plan that violated every principle of coalition military doctrine. His ships would scatter randomly, with no formation at all. They would use asteroid fields as weapons, launching rocks at enemy ships. They would deploy decoy drones to confuse targeting. They would even send false retreat orders to lure the enemy into traps. "This is dishonorable," one commander protested. This is deception chaos. This is survival, Dongwu corrected. They learned your honor, your logic, your patterns. Now they need to learn something new. Humans don't play by anyone's rules. One saw the resistance in the room, but she also saw the casualty reports mounting on every screen. Do it, she ordered. Captain Dongwu has operational command of the defense. The human fleet moved out immediately. One watched from the command center as they approached the battle zone. They had surrounded the colony, slowly crushing the coalition defenders. Then Dongwu's ships arrived, and everything changed. The human vessels ignored all standard tactics. They scattered into the asteroid field, making themselves hard targets. When ships pursued, the humans led them into areas where the asteroids were densest, then used magnetic grapples to slingshot huge rocks at enemy vessels. Human pilots broadcasted false communications on coalition frequencies, making them think reinforcements were coming from different directions. They launched dozens of decoy drones that mimicked ship signatures, forcing them to waste energy shooting at ghosts. When a human ship was damaged beyond repair, the crew evacuated and then remotely piloted it straight into a cluster of vessels, detonating it as a makeshift bomb. It was chaotic, it was unpredictable, it was completely insane by coalition standards. It worked. They couldn't adapt fast enough. Their hive mind was built on processing patterns and predicting logical outcomes. The human tactics had no pattern. Each ship acted independently, making split-second decisions that no central intelligence could predict. After 6 hours of fighting, the colony was saved. In the command center, the coalition officers stared at the battle recordings in stunned silence. Turned to Dongwu. You fight like, they said slowly. We fight like humans, Dongwu corrected, and that's exactly what you need. The success had changed everything. Within weeks, human tactical advisors were assigned to every major coalition fleet. The results were immediate and disturbing. Coalition forces started winning again, but the methods made many uncomfortable. In a converted cargo bay that now served as a weapons development lab, Engineer Jin worked alongside Dr. Rim. The scientist watched with fascination and growing concern as Jin assembled what looked like a simple aerosol dispenser. This compound will disrupt neural communication for approximately 30 minutes, Jin explained, her hands steady as she calibrated the mixture. It's based on chemical warfare principles from Earth. Chemical warfare is banned by coalition law, Rim said carefully. So is losing a war to extinction-level threat, Jin replied without looking up. They communicate through biochemical signals. This disrupts those signals. It's non-lethal, temporary, and highly effective. Do you want to win or do you want to feel righteous? Rim didn't answer immediately. She had spent 6 years studying biology in hopes of finding peaceful solutions. But she had also watched her entire research team die when their station fell. Ethics became complicated when survival was at stake. Will it cause permanent damage? Rim asked finally. No, they'll recover fully. They'll just be confused and disoriented while it's active. Then proceed. Jin smiled grimly, already field testing it on the next engagement. Across the station, in a briefing room that still smelled of fresh construction, stood before a mixed group of coalition and human soldiers. He had been pulled from his freelance work to train infiltration teams. Everything you learned about stealth is wrong, told the assembled group. Coalition stealth doctrine is about being invisible, about perfect silence. That works against species that think like you. They don't think like you. They perceive differently. We need to exploit that. A warrior raised his armored hand. How do we hide from a hive mind with biosensors throughout an entire sector? We don't hide, we lie. Activated a holographic display showing a biosensor network. We're developing a coating made from dead tissue. It makes our ships smell like them to their sensors. We broadcast neural signals that mimic their communication patterns. We don't try to be invisible, we try to be them. A telepath looked disturbed. This is grotesque, using their dead as camouflage. War is grotesque, said bluntly. That's why we try to avoid it, but when you're in it, you use every advantage. They won't hesitate to use our dead. Why should we? The room fell silent. These were the conversations happening throughout Coalition Command. Humans were introducing concepts that made civilized species uncomfortable. Deception, psychological warfare, asymmetric tactics. But the alternative was extinction. Admiral One called an emergency meeting of senior command. Captain Dongwu and joined her. When everyone was assembled, One activated a secure holographic projection. We've been fighting defensively for 3 months, she began. We've stopped their advance. We've held our territory, but we're not winning. We're surviving. That's not good enough. What are you proposing? Asked. One nodded to who stepped forward. A deep strike mission into space. Our objective, locate and destroy the swarm queens coordinating these attacks. The room erupted in protests. A commander stood. That's suicide. No one has penetrated more than 3 sectors into territory and returned. No coalition force has, corrected. Because you've been using coalition methods, we're going to use human methods. He showed them the plan. A small team, heavily modified ships, coated with biomatter and broadcasting false hive signals. They would travel through radiation zones that coalition ships avoided because they were considered too dangerous. They would use routes through unstable star systems that no logical commander would risk. They would rely on unpredictability and thus own assumptions against them. They expect us to be logical, Dongwu added. They expect us to value survival. We're going to do things that no sane tactical mind would approve. That's our advantage. Who would crew this mission? An admiral demanded. Volunteers said, mixed human and coalition teams. I'll lead the insertion. One added, while the deep strike team is in space, Captain Dongwu and I will coordinate a massive feint operation. We'll draw their forces away from their core territory, make them think we're launching a conventional assault on their outer sectors. The debate lasted for hours. Many commanders thought the plan was insane. Others argued it was their only chance to end the war before resources ran out. In the end, desperation won again. Lieutenant was the first to volunteer for the deep strike team. She was a human combat medic with experience in hostile environment operations. When asked why she wanted to join a suicide mission, she shrugged. Someone needs to patch you idiots up when this goes wrong, she said. A human intelligence officer who had spent 2 years studying communication patterns, volunteered next. Then came a navigator named Or, a weapons specialist, and 3 warriors who had lost their families to the attacks. They trained for 2 weeks. The ships were modified extensively. Jin personally oversaw the installation of the biocoding systems and neural signal broadcasters. Dr. Rim provided detailed maps of territory based on her research. The queens will be in the central nebula, Rim explained, pointing to a dense cloud formation on the star map. They need the nebula's radiation to maintain their neural links across interstellar distances. Find the queens, and you cut off the swarm's coordination. And if we're wrong, asked. Rim met his eyes. Then you die for nothing and we lose this war. Comforting. The night before departure found One in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She looked tired. The last 3 months had aged her. I recommended you for this mission, she said quietly. You were right about the when no one else listened, but I'm sending you to die and we both know it. Someone has to go, replied. He stood beside her looking at the same stars. At least this way it means something. If you succeed, if you find the queens, what will you do? Whatever it takes. One nodded slowly. The coalition still doesn't understand humans. They see our tactics and they're grateful but also horrified. They don't realize that this is just who we are. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We learned every dirty trick. Maybe that's why we're good at this, said. We've seen the worst of war. The Coalition experienced 50 years of it and thought they understood. But Earth, we've had continuous warfare since we picked up the first rocks. We know war in ways that peaceful species can't comprehend. Is that something to be proud of? Consider the question. No, but it's what makes us useful right now. The next morning, his team launched. 5 small ships, barely visible against the cosmic background, coated in biological matter that made sensor operators queasy. They looked more like vessels than Coalition craft. As they jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading into enemy territory on a mission that military analysts gave a 3% survival chance, allowed himself one thought. The Coalition had called humans primitive. They were about to learn that sometimes the most primitive species were the most dangerous, because they had never forgotten how to fight in the dark. The journey through space was a waking nightmare. His team traveled through radiation zones that made their instruments scream warnings. They passed through gravitational anomalies that twisted space itself. They broadcasted false neural signals constantly, pretending to be part of the swarm. For 3 weeks, they saw ships everywhere. Massive hive vessels moved in patterns that covered entire star systems. Smaller scout units darted between sectors, and always, the team expected to be discovered. Radiation levels are approaching lethal, reported from the medical station. She had been treating the crew for radiation sickness for days. We can't sustain this much longer. We're close, Na said, studying her communication intercepts. The intelligence officer had barely slept since they entered enemy territory. The neural signal density is increasing. The queens have to be in the next sector. Or the L navigator suddenly went rigid. His telepathic senses picked up something that made him gasp. There are so many minds, billions of them, all connected, all thinking as one. Can they sense you? Asked sharply. No, I'm too small, too different to them. I'm like a single cell in an ocean, but the pressure of all those minds, Or's voice trembled. I've never felt anything like this. They emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of a massive nebula. What they saw stopped all conversation. The nebula glowed with bioluminescence, but it wasn't just gas and radiation. It was alive. Biostructures stretched through the clouds like neural pathways. Massive chambers pulsed with energy, and at the center, visible even at this distance, were 3 enormous structures that could only be the queen chambers. Reading massive life signs, reported the weapons specialist. Those chambers contain thousands of individual. The queens must be at the center of each. Begin attack approach, ordered. His hand tightened on the control stick. This was it. Everything depended on the next few hours. But as they moved closer, Na made a discovery that changed everything. She had been monitoring communications, trying to understand their coordination. Now her face went pale. You need to see this. The translated data appeared on the main screen. At first, it looked like standard swarm communication. But as Na highlighted certain patterns, a message became clear. They weren't conquerors. They were refugees. They're fleeing, Na said, her voice shaking. There's something else out there, something that destroyed their original home system. They came to this galaxy looking for territory to survive. The war wasn't about conquest. It was desperation. Dr. Rim's voice came through on the communication channel. She had insisted on maintaining long-range contact with the team despite the risks. Are you certain? Yes, the data is clear. They call it the Void Swarm. It consumed their entire civilization. Only the queens and a fraction of their population escaped. One of the warriors who had lost his entire family to attacks, spoke up. So what? They still killed millions of our people. They still invaded our space. From their perspective, we were occupying territory they needed to survive, or said quietly. The telepath had sensed the truth in the signals. They saw us the same way we saw them, as invaders. Felt the weight of command pressing down on him. His orders were clear: destroy the queens, end the swarm's coordination, win the war. But now those orders meant genocide against refugees, against survivors of an even greater threat. "What's the status of the attack drones?" he asked. "Armed and ready. We can destroy all 3 chambers from this range. The queens won't have time to evacuate." Stared at the chambers on his screen. He thought about the colonies that had destroyed, the people who had died, the fear and suffering. But he also thought about Earth's history, about refugees turned away from borders, about desperate people doing terrible things to survive. "Nah, can you open a communication channel to the queens?" The intelligence officer's eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me. Open a channel. Let's try something the coalition has never done. Let's talk to them." "This is insane," N protested. "They'll destroy us." "Maybe, or maybe we find a better solution. That's the human way, right? We try the impossible." The channel opened. It took several minutes for the queens to respond. When they did, the translation came through as overlapping voices, all speaking as one. "Humans, we know your species. Young, adaptable, dangerous." "We know what you're fleeing," said. "The void swarm, you're refugees, not conquerors." "Silence, then you offer mercy after we destroyed your colonies." "I'm offering a conversation before more people die, both our species." Meanwhile, back in coalition space, Captain Dongwu was executing his part of the plan. His fleet was conducting a massive assault on the outer territories, drawing away every swarm unit that could respond. It was working too well. "Sir, they're committing everything," reported his tactical officer. "Their entire outer defense fleet is moving to intercept us." Dongwu watched the display. Thousands of ships were converging. His small fleet was outnumbered 100 to 1. "Maintain the feint," he ordered. "Give time." But he knew what those numbers meant. The coalition fleet was with him, but even combined, they couldn't hold against this many enemies. This was always going to be a one-way mission. When the close to engagement range, Dongwu's fleet scattered according to plan. They used every trick humans had taught the coalition: decoys, false signals, asteroid slingshots, ramming attacks. They fought with such ferocity that they couldn't advance despite their numbers. But slowly, inevitably, the human ships began to fall. Dongwu's flagship took a direct hit that tore through the port side. Emergency alarms screamed. His crew struggled to maintain control. "Sir, we need to evacuate," his second officer said. "Not yet." Dongwu looked at the tactical display. "Still needed time. Redirect all power to engines. We're going to make this count." He piloted his dying ship directly into the center of the formation. His crew understood. Some evacuated. Others stayed, strapping into their stations for the last ride. "For Earth," Dongwu said quietly. Then he activated the core overload. The explosion took out 37 ships. It created a gap in their formation that allowed the coalition fleet to push through. It bought the time he needed. In the Queen chambers, watched the battle data come through. He saw Dongwu's ship disappear from the sensors. He understood what that meant. "Your captain sacrificed himself," the Queens observed. "For you, for this mission. Humans truly are dangerous, not because of your weapons, because of your willingness to pay any price." "That's what makes us human," said. His voice was rough. Dongwu had been a good man. "We fight for each other, even when it costs everything. Now let me offer you something, a choice. Keep fighting and both our species die, or find another way. We can't give you coalition space. But humans are good at making impossible things work. Let us try." The Queens went silent, waited, knowing his weapons were still locked on their chambers, knowing one word from him would end this war the bloody way. Finally, the queen spoke. "We will listen to your proposal, but know this, human. If you betray us, if this is deception, we will remember, and we will ensure your species pays the price." "Understood. But if we succeed, if we find a solution, you need to remember something too. Humans kept their word when it mattered most. We chose mercy when we could have chosen revenge." "Why?" Thought about his answer carefully. "Because we've been refugees too. Because we've fought desperate wars. Because we know that yesterday's enemy can become tomorrow's ally. It's the most human thing there is. Hope that things can be better." The emergency council meeting was the most contentious in coalition history. When returned and proposed a truce with half the assembled leaders wanted to arrest him for treason. "You negotiated with the enemy without authorization," roared a senator. "You were supposed to destroy them, not make deals." "I was supposed to end the war," replied calmly. "That's what I did, just not the way you expected." Admiral One stood beside him at the podium. She had been promoted after the successful defense campaigns, but now she faced court-martial for supporting his decision. "They are refugees," One explained. "They're fleeing an extragalactic threat that consumed their entire civilization. Yes, they attacked us, but from their perspective, we were occupying the territory they needed to survive. This isn't good versus evil. It's two desperate species fighting over limited resources. So we should give them our worlds," demanded a council member. "No," said a new voice. Commander entered the chamber, Earth's official ambassador to the coalition. He was older than most humans in coalition service, his hair completely white, but his eyes were sharp. "We should do what humans have done 1,000 times in our history. We find a third option." He activated a holographic display showing uninhabitable worlds throughout coalition space. "These planets are useless to coalition species. Wrong atmospheres, wrong gravity, too much radiation. But they are adaptable. Their biotechnology can terraform these worlds. In exchange, they work with us. Their biological knowledge combined with human engineering could transform dead worlds into living ones." "Terraforming takes centuries," a L representative objected. "With current coalition technology, yes," agreed. "But we've seen what happens when different species share knowledge. Human creativity plus bioengineering could cut that time dramatically. Give us 10 years. If we fail, you can always go back to war." The debate lasted for 3 days. Colony representatives who had lost people to attacks spoke against the plan. Scientists who saw the potential benefits spoke in favor. Military commanders were divided. The final vote was close. 51% in favor, 49% against. The margin was so thin that riots broke out on several worlds. But the decision was made. The war would end not with extermination, but with cooperation. Dr. Rim and Engineer Jin led the first joint research station. It was built on a neutral asteroid, equidistant from coalition and space. The security was intense. Armed ships from both sides patrolled constantly. The early days were tense. Workers and coalition scientists didn't trust each other. Communication was difficult. Several incidents nearly sparked renewed fighting. But slowly, impossibly, it began to work. Rim discovered that biostructures could accelerate plant growth by 300%. Jin figured out how to protect those structures from the harsh conditions of dead worlds. Together, they developed a terraforming process that transformed the first test planet in just 2 years. The planet had been a radiation-soaked rock that would kill unprotected coalition species in minutes. Now it had a breathable atmosphere and rapidly spreading vegetation. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. More importantly, it proved the concept could work. Over the next 5 years, joint teams transformed 12 dead worlds. They began settling them. Tensions eased as both species realized the benefits of cooperation. Trade agreements followed. Cultural exchanges. Slowly, carefully, enemies became neighbors. Admiral One commanded the new combined fleet, a force that included coalition, human, and ships. It was controversial but effective. The three species learned from each other's strengths. Served as her chief strategic advisor. He refused to wear a formal uniform or follow most regulations, which drove the traditionalists crazy. But One valued his perspective too much to care about protocol. One morning, One was reviewing long-range sensor data when entered her office. His expression was serious. "We have a problem," he said. He showed her the data. Deep space anomalies at the edge of the galaxy. Energy signatures that matched nothing in coalition databases. But Dr. Rim had seen them before in the records of their destroyed home. "The Void Swarm," One said quietly. "They're 2 years out, maybe less," pulled up projections. "They consume biological matter on a galactic scale. That's why they fled. That's why they were so desperate for territory. They knew this was coming." One felt cold. They knew this threat was following them. The Queens claimed they didn't. They thought they had escaped. But the Void Swarm moves between galaxies. It was only a matter of time before it found this one. An emergency session was called. The Queens appeared via holographic projection. When confronted about the Void Swarm, they didn't deny it. "We hoped we had escaped them," the Queens said. "We did not lie, we simply did not know they would follow. But now you understand why we fought so desperately. Death was always coming. We needed territory, resources, allies. Alone, we would be consumed. Together, perhaps we can fight." The coalition leadership was furious. Some demanded the truce be ended. Others argued it was too late to go back to fighting each other when a greater threat approached. Intelligence Officer Na, now promoted to senior analyst, provided the sobering analysis. "If they couldn't stop the Void Swarm with their entire civilization, we can't either. Not separately. Our only chance is together." The debate was bitter, but reality forced the decision. The combined fleet began preparing for a threat unlike anything they had faced before. Found himself in an observation deck with several other humans who had been part of the original mission. Lieutenant, now head of combat medical services. Na, others who had survived the desperate early days. "We did this," said quietly. "We pushed for peace with the. Now we find out they brought an extinction-level threat with them." "They didn't know," replied, but he understood her anger. "And it doesn't matter now. The Void Swarm is coming either way. At least now we have the helping us instead of fighting us." "Do you really think we can win?" Na asked. Looked out at the combined fleet. Coalition cruisers flew in formation with bioships and human frigates. 3 species that had been killing each other 2 years ago now trained together. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know something the Void Swarm doesn't. They think they're facing the coalition. Logical, predictable, honorable, but they're not. They're facing something new, a combined force that includes humans. And that makes a difference," pressed. "Humans have been the underdog for our entire existence. We've faced impossible odds 1,000 times. We've fought enemies we couldn't match in strength or technology. And we survived by being unpredictable, creative, and too stubborn to quit." Smiled slightly. "The Void Swarm has conquered galaxies by overwhelming superior force. They've probably never met anyone stupid enough to fight back when they're clearly outmatched." "So we're planning to be stupid?" Na asked. "Aggressively stupid, creatively stupid, in ways that make no logical sense." Smile widened. "It's the most human strategy there is." Admiral One called the senior staff together for final preparations. She looked at the assembled officers, scientists, navigators, warriors, hive coordinators, and humans from Earth. 2 years ago, this group would have been killing each other. "The Void Swarm expects us to be afraid," One said. "They expect us to run or hide. They've consumed entire civilizations. To them, we're just another meal. But they don't know something important. They don't know about humans. They don't know that we've taken 3 warring species and turned them into allies in less than 5 years. They don't know that we specialize in impossible victories. She looked at 2 years ago, the coalition thought the war was finished. Then came the humans. We showed them that finishing a war doesn't always mean destroying your enemy. Sometimes it means making them your ally. Now we're going to teach the Void Swarm the same lesson. Not because we're stronger, but because we're human and humans don't know when to quit. The Void Swarm has been winning for millions of years. They've developed their tactics over countless victories. They know what works. They're probably perfect at conventional warfare. He grinned. Good thing we don't fight conventionally. As the meeting ended and officers returned to their posts, Earth's communication came through. The home world had been briefed on the situation. They were sending everything they had. Commander delivered Earth's message personally. Humanity has faced extinction before. We've stood on the edge and refused to fall. The Void Swarm thinks this will be easy, but they haven't learned what the Coalition learned, learned. You don't threaten humans and expect a logical response. You get chaos. You get creativity. You get everything we've learned from 10,000 years of warfare concentrated into pure, stubborn defiance. 2 years, that's how long they had to prepare. To take everything humans had taught the Coalition about fighting and push it further. To combine the best of 3 species into something new. The Void Swarm was coming, and humanity, along with its new allies, would be ready to show them why you should never underestimate the species crazy enough to turn enemies into friends, and then drag them all into an impossible fight. Because that's what humans do. They thought the war was finished. They were wrong, it was just beginning.